welcome everyone to the launch of The Marvellous Adventures of Mary Seacole. So we'll kick off just with me introducing Cleo and giving you a of background. She has an incredible CV. She made her West End debut in Wise Child by Simon with Sir Alec Guinness, for which she was nominated Most Promising Actress. She then went on to be the first Black British actress to have a leading role at the National Theatre in The National Health, a play by Peter Nichols, followed by seasons at the Young Vic, including tours to Broadway and Mexico. In film, she's been in Ken Loach's films Cathy Come Home, Up the Junction and Poor Cow, and has acted in numerous TV shows from Grange Hill to presenting Play School and guesting in the Christmas 2020 special of All Creatures Great and Small. In music, she started out at the top making a record with the Rolling Stones while she was a teenager. And she's recently returned to her first love of music, forming the blues band Honeybee Mama and Friends, who have appeared at the Queen Elizabeth Hall and the Ealing Blues Festival, among many other venues. So Cleo is tonight named Cess Darker.
I've had terrible trouble. My computer's bust and it couldn't get repaired in time. So I can't rename myself on this either. I was trying to rename myself. I'm so sorry. So I've morphed into Cess Darker.
That's okay. We'll let you off, Cleo. So do you want to tell us about this play? I understand you had the idea for it when you read the autobiography of Mary Seacole. And then it took you many, many years to actually sit down and write it. Do you want to tell us about that process? Yes,
it was a very long gestation period, about 20 years. I initially, I was working at Oxford Playhouse, and one Saturday in London, we were rehearsing in London, I went down to my local bookshop, Centerprise, which was a wonderful community bookshop in Dalston, and a book sort of leapt out at me, and it was The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. And there was this amazing woman looking very imperious with her string of pearls. And I thought, oh, I must get that book and read all about this woman. I'd never heard of her. And went home, read it, and thought, my God, this is incredible. Remembering at the time, nobody knew about Mary Seacole, really, in Britain, apart from Ziggy Alexander and Audrey Juji, who had, in fact, reprinted the book and discovered the book. So I was working at Oxford Playhouse, so didn't really do anything about it. But it was in the back of my mind. I was also bringing up 3 young children. And about 20 years later, I was running the Rosemary Branch Theatre with Cess Darker. And we were doing the box office one evening, and I was telling Cess all about Mary Seacole and how wonderful I thought it would be for a play. And somebody came across and said, I couldn't help overhearing your conversation. I think these people would be interested. And it was a card from the Florence Nightingale Museum. So I went along to see the Florence Nightingale Museum. And at the end of the conversation, they asked me if I'd do a week of performances for children about Mary Seacole in the June. This was in the January. Eventually, I managed to write just a short version, and this did very well. So I then decided to expand it into an adult monologue of about an hour. So that's really the what happened. And Elizabeth was involved because she saw it very early on and got me along to the House of Lords to perform it.
Are you going to read a bit for us tonight, Cleo?
I can read a bit. I can read a bit about the about the herbs. I thought a very short piece about the herbs, and then a piece about the Crimea. But the herbs. The remedies I made were called simples, or single remedies, each one matched to a different symptom. Sometimes I would experiment on myself, not always a success, but I believe healers should try their own remedies. By the time I was 12 years old, my mother had given me this special box for my remedies, and I was helping her to take care of my patients. And so it was, I became a healer. But healing is not just about giving medicines. It's about fresh air, good food, as well as talking to people and listening to their stories, especially listening to their stories of distant lands. And it so made me want to travel. And then there's a piece from the Crimean War. And this is after the siege, when she went into Sebastopol, after the siege of Sebastopol. I witnessed the whole thing and was the first woman to enter the fallen city. Not a building was left standing. The streets full of drunken looters. Everywhere wreck and destruction, blood and blackened remains of men and horses. Untended, dying British soldiers, maggots crawling in their wounds, rats gnawing at their poor limbs. Young boys, maddened with pain, glaring out at me as I passed, weeping. And over it all, the sickening stench of death in a sky ablaze with fire. I was there, my friends. I was there.
That's quite a powerful piece, isn't it? What was the audience's reaction when you performed the play?
Oh, it was excellent. It was really good. They were very emotional. A lot of people hadn't heard about Mary. And so they would come up at the end and say, oh, thank you for introducing her to us. And in all, it really did get a very good reception.
And you also performed it to help raise funds, didn't you, for the statue of Mary Seacole? Can you tell me a bit about that?
Yes, I did a few performances in different venues, and just to get some money. And in fact, when I did it in Edinburgh, I actually did it for the homeless in Edinburgh because there were I noticed there were lots of soldiers who were homeless and begging, and I've contacted a local charity there and decided to raise money for them.
Mm. And we're going to talk about the statue of Mary Seacole and the campaign with the panel, but I know that it took 10 years. And presumably throughout that time, people were trying to raise awareness about Mary Seacole. And yet, from what I've read about her, she was incredibly famous in her day. And yet she was forgotten and sort of faded out of history. So, is this a sort of ongoing problem with, especially women? Black
I think it is. I think it is, definitely. And in fact, the terrible thing was that they wanted to take her off the syllabus at one stage as well. But fortunately, she's now back on. But no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, do you want to tell us about any plans you've got to perform the play again in the future?
I haven't any immediate plans. I will be taking part. There's a canal festival. I will be appearing at that and maybe doing some readings for it. But at the moment, I'm busy working. I'm rehearsing at the National, so I'll be there until the summer. And then after that, I don't know what's going to happen. So I might try and revive it in the autumn some stage. Yeah, or if not, it's a wonderful opportunity, hopefully, for younger actors to do it.
It's the perfect piece, really, isn't it, for a young theatre troupe to take round schools, particularly, or to other educational settings. And I hope it will be picked up and done by other people. And that's really one of the reasons why we've published it, because we do think it's got a future in schools and educational environments, colleges. And we hope people will enjoy performing the part, because it's also a great part.
And you could also, there are other characters in it, so you could actually delegate those to other actors if you wanted to.
Yes, it doesn't have to be done as a one-woman show, does it?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to bring the panel in now. We've got with us tonight Jack Bueller, Elizabeth Onyenwu, Charmaine Case, Patrick Vernon, and Julia Alexander. And I'm going to let them introduce themselves before we have a discussion about Mary Seacole. And also, because it's International Nursing Day, we also want to celebrate and pay tribute to nurses around the world. So
can I just say
go on.
Thank you so much to the panel for coming along, and Dua Lipa's favourite nurse, and also to all the people watching. Thank you so much for taking part. Thank you.
Okay, so Charmaine, would you like to kick off?
Okay, so my name's Charmaine Case. I am a breast screening clinical nurse specialist, which means I'm sort of at the top of my field to the practical level before I go into management, which I don't want to go into. I've been nursing since 1983. These are very nice highlights, not really grey hair. And I am the secretary of the Mary Seacole Memorial Association, which is separate from the Mary Seacole Trust. We found her grave in Kensal Rise, Kensal Green, really. And we redid her headstone with the help of other associations like the Nurse Association of Jamaica, the Jamaican High Commission. It's a beautiful white marble gravestone and plinth. And we have a service every year to commemorate Mary in May, which is around her birthday. And so I'm the secretary of that, and I'm also the president of the Nurse Association of Jamaica, who've been going for 40 odd years, as well as the Mary Seacole's been going on for 40 odd years. So I am a nurse currently, and Mary Seacole is one of my heroes. That's it.
Thank you, Charmaine. Patrick, could you tell us about yourself, please?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Patrick Vernon. I'm a campaigner, activist, culture historian, troublemaker, all kind of stuff. So I've got a very long history with Mary Seacole. I first knew about her actually in the 80s when I was a student. It's one of those periods, when you go to university and you kind of do your own kind of personal discovery of Black history, Black identity. So I was still in law at university, but I had an interest in Black history at the time. So I did my own kind of reading and I discovered Mary Seacole. But it was until years and years later, when I did the campaign for 100 Great Black Britons, that the campaign helped to elevate her out of obscurity in many ways, to be quite honest. So I've been involved at the beginning, I've been involved different aspects of there's been different elements of the Mary Seacole campaign. There's been a campaign for the statue, and there's been recognition for her in the national curriculum, and also there's been the role of archives and especially the National Portrait Gallery. I noticed Helen Rappers was on the line, and they played a key role. So I've been involved in lots of conversations, plus with the fundraising efforts by Mary Seacole over the last total now 15, 20 years.
Thank you, Patrick. Juliet, you want to go next?
Hello, thank you very much for that. And thank you for inviting me. I'm in esteemed company, absolutely amazing people. Charmaine, whose history precedes her, the fabulous, fabulous Cleo, who is just the most wonderful lady. And I have been involved, obviously. I was a committee member, a board member of the Mary Seacole Memorial Statue Appeal, and it was one of my proudest achievements to have that statue unveiled, overlooking Parliament, standing outside St Thomas's Hospital. It is a beacon of hope. It's a magnet for people, particularly in the year and a half that we've had, where we have upheld and heralded the amazing work of our NHS staff. It's amazing that we have this statue there that just sort of brings it all together. And I'm immensely proud of the fact that I had a very small involvement in it. Cleo is just superb. Cleo's talking about coming to the House of Lords, even more so. She came to both schools. I work as a careers lead in a number of Hackney schools. She came to our school to enthuse the students. They're the ones who went back into class. They're the ones who went back home and said, Mum, Dad, teacher, have you heard about Mary Seacole? We need to know more about it. They're the ones who, they're just amazing. The youth really took it on board. We've got hundreds of schools with the name Mary Seacole as, form rooms. We've got road names. It's just truly phenomenal. And Cleo came into one of the schools I did, and she dressed in the beautiful costumes of the day, looking exactly like Mary Seacole probably looked in her day, and she did her monologue, and I'm so happy and proud to see that now encapsulated in something like this. It's marvellous. Patrick has done amazing work, and just, as he said, raising the profile of Mary Seacole. People like Connie Marks, late great Connie Marks, who worked, I think, Charmaine, you will know her, of course. She helped to find that great, absolutely amazing lady, and there's many others I could mention. Basically, we're just following in their footsteps, using whatever stage we have to make sure that the name Mary Seacole and also the legacy of the NHS contribution to the UK will never be forgotten. It's just amazing. And so that's me. My background is, back in the day, apparently I used to be a TV producer.
Thank you. Thank you, Juliet.
My pleasure.
Jack, can we hear from you now, please?
Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this wonderful panel discussion, and I was very much illuminated by Cleo's presentation.
Oh,
can you hear me?
Sorry, could we ask Jonathan to switch his sound off? Any newcomers, could you please switch off your sound?
Sorry.
Yeah. So I first was introduced to Mary Seacole. First, a little bit about myself. I'll tell you about Mary first, of course. In the early 80s, about 1983, I used to be in a band, a boy band called Stigma, and one of my the mother of one of the artists in the band, a guy called Frank Tobin, his mother was an Irish lady. She introduced me literally to Mary Seacole. I was walking along Harrow Road, and this is about 1983, and she said, I'm not going to do an impersonation. I do a decent Irish impersonation, but I won't do it on this platform. But she said, Jan, would you like to, have you heard about this Mary Seacole, lads? Anyway, that's the best I'll do. And of course I hadn't. And so she took me to Mary's grave, which at that time hadn't been redone, hadn't been done over. I think that came much later. I'm not sure. But anyway, my recollection of being introduced to Mary was on that day. I would say 13 years later, in 1995, actually, I worked with Elizabeth on doing a plaque to her, a Westminster plaque to her at George Street. where she lived. And I was very happy to be the organizer of that. And actually, that's what got me into plaques. I'll talk a little bit about what I do. I do acts and books and plaques and statues and board games commemorating the Black presence, both in Britain and across the world, of which Mary has featured in a few of my products. So that's me.
Okay, and I know that Elizabeth Anionwu is actually still struggling to get onto the Zoom. So while I try and get her in, we'll just move on to the questions. So the first question I'd like to ask the panel and Cleo is, what do people know of Mary Seacole today? Jack, do you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. Okay. Well, as has been well mentioned, Patrick has done a wonderful job with Mary Seacole. Well, the people who voted, I should say, done a wonderful job in his wonderful idea to look at the wonderful contributions Black people have been making to Britain. Whether Mary should have been number one or not is another point. I won't put that out there on this platform, but nevertheless, that particular initiative elevated Mary into the national consciousness. And even a lot of Black folk who hadn't heard of her at the time was fascinated by this nurse who, in many respects, replicated and even did more than the much lauded Florence Nightingale, who was, by the way, number 52 amongst the great Britons. And I think that's what inspired Patrick to come up with the 100 Great Black Britons, of which I was happy to play a little part. I'm sure he'll mention that later. But what's the question? Sorry, I'm just waffling.
What do we know today of her?
What do we know about today?
Do people know about her today?
What we know about her today was she was this robust Jamaican who came to England and went to Crimea and helped English soldiers. Boom. It makes no sense. There you go.
Okay. Let's ask Charmaine. I imagine that the nursing community know more about her.
We do, but until she became, well, I knew about her because of the grave and getting it redone so that it's beautiful and, you know, it's beautiful now. But it was when she became, because of Patrick, the top of the Black British, that people started to investigate. And many nurses didn't know about it. And Elizabeth, I hope she can get on. Elizabeth was one of those people that really pushed her to the forefront. Elizabeth was working at Thames Valley University then, with part of her sickle cell campaign. Well, that was her job and her teaching. And they named it, I think they named part of the university Mary Seacole. And when you investigate how many places actually called Mary Seacole, whether it's a nursing home, a road, a classroom, I work at St George's and we've got a ward called Mary Seacole. And that's been there for ages and they just didn't really take any notice. So I think the 100 Black Britons really pushed her ahead. Then when she became part of the curriculum and when we started really pushing for the statue, that made a lot of people talk about her. Her book is fantastic and people must remember that that book was written in the 1800s and it was written by a Black woman. So it may not have all the details that everyone wants. There's a lot of controversy about her light skin, but for that time, that was an amazing book. And she was, you know, they did a gala for her. People must realise that that's a big thing. You know, in the Victorian times, they did a gala for her. You know, the soldiers came back and told her tales. And that's what inspires the nurses of her tenacity to go out there and do it. You know, Florence was having none of it, so she decided to just go by herself. Great. She went and she displayed what we in the nursing field feel of courage, commitment, caring, compassion, and she was there. that's what I know about Mary Seacole, and that's what my friends know because I tell them all the time.
Okay, Patrick, can you tell us about the 100 Black Britons thing you organised, and why did she come top?
Yes, sure. I hope Elizabeth comes online because prior to even having the idea of the campaign, I'd been working for the NHS as a director. I was the director of Health Access Zone in Brent, and because Elizabeth was a part of the cell, and her legacy is in places like West London, so I knew. By that time, she was already lecturing, but I knew of Elizabeth, and she always talked about Mary Seacole and all stuff. She actually made a number of short documentaries on TV about the life of Mary Seacole prior to launch the campaign. But essentially, the BBC in 2002 launched a major initiative called, they were trying to find the greatest Britain of all time. It was at a time in Britain, if you can think cast back in the early 2000s, New Labour was in power. Tony Blair had this vision of a new kind of identity using Britpop, using Blur. Didn't quite work out in that way. It fizzled out a bit. There was at that time there was a move. The SNP was starting to gain traction, and there was a move for as we know now around Scottish independence. Same thing in Wales for Mine Cymru. Fight for independence, and also in the English regions, major cities like in Manchester, Birmingham, and up in Yorkshire were all demanding that there should be regional government. So I think the BBC in that context also had 9/11. So there was a whole. So I think what happens is when a country is going through a identity crisis, which Britain was going through an identity crisis. But the BBC thought had a great idea. If we have a search for the greatest Britain of all time, it would somehow unite the country together. And the reason why I know this is because after I did the campaign, I spoke to Jane Root, who's a controller of BBC Two, and that was her idea. So I know that. So talking with her. So the BBC launched the campaign in 2002. They spent probably hundreds of thousands of pounds. Having major advertising campaigns around the country, advertising reporting, obviously using the BBC platforms, TV and radio, trying to encourage the public to nominate, to identify their favourite Britain of all time. Then they had the official 100 list, and then that went down to the top 10. So when it came to the 100 list, which was roughly around the summer of 2002. There was not one black person on that list. And the only person that was on that list of any ethnic description was Freddie Mercury, lead singer of the band Queen, who was born in Zanzibar, Farsi parents. And that was it, basically. And so I can remember at the time, I was a member of BASA, which is a Black and Asian Society network. So it's a Dismail, which has been going on for 25 years now, where people share information about Black and Asian history, and people complain at the time. So this is outrageous. Again, another example of structural racism, whitewashing out Black and Asian heritage in such a major campaign around public history in many ways. And what was interesting, a lot of people complained about the campaign when the BBC did. The Irish complained, there weren't enough Irish people on the list. The Scots complained, the Welsh complained, a lot of feminists complained that it just kind of reinforced this, which is actually ironically, because we're in the middle of this culture war now as we speak because of Black Lives Matter. You know, white, male, pale history. That was it. It just felt like that was same old again. And then when the BBC announced the winner, which was Winston Churchill, around about, I don't know, it was October 2002 during Black History Month. I thought, hold on, this is Black History Month, and there's no recognition of Black history at all. So I decided that there had to be an intervention. So I thought I looked at the idea of a campaign as a counter campaign, to be quite honest. And I didn't expect. If you asked me at the time, would it have such a reverberation? No, I didn't believe it would have. Even now, today. So I thought I'd do a counter campaign, being a campaigner activist, to use my history knowledge. I asked various people for support. So Nubian Jack, I approached Nubian Jack. At the time, Nubian Jack was doing fantastic stuff. It still is, but it's particularly his board game, his book, and all that kind of stuff. So he was a great font of knowledge to ask his knowledge base about who do you think should be, if I put together a list of who should what to look like, I think Stephen Bourne's online, spoke to Stephen Bourne, a number of people, and basically working with my colleague, Dr. Anthony Austin, we pulled together a list, did the research work, and we launched the website in October the 1st, 2003, with the support of the GLA. Ken Livingstone was mayor at the time, and we did a joint press release, we launched it, we had an event at City Hall, actually Jack was one of the speakers at that event. Jeanette Arnold, who was, she just recently stepped down as GLA member. Jeanette Arnold was a nurse in training, an active member of the Royal College of Nursing. Actually, we had a panel debate, our own panel debate at City Hall, and she was advocating for Mary Seacole. And I think we had about 5 or 6 people talking. I think Newman Jack was, I was September Severus that you were advocating for, I remember. But anyway, actually, ironically, when we had the vote at City Hall, we had a full house, about 250 people there. People voted for Mary Seacole, then actually on the launch of the campaign. The website went absolutely ballistic. Actually, the website crashed after 2 days because we had so many people trying to go online to vote, and it was quite early and quite obvious in the early days of the voting that Mary Seacole was the front runner. The campaign ran from October the 1st, and I announced the results live on Channel 4 News in February 2004, and it's Mary Seacole, and the public. You know, I mean, over 10,000 votes were cast, and Mary Seacole a large bulk of that. And one of the reasons I think was actually a lot of nurses were online. You know, I think there was I mean, maybe if there was, the Electoral Reform Commission should have got involved. But I think a lot of nurses went online and just pushed it hard. That's my analysis. Obviously, people knew there were other great historical figures on there, but I think the nursing fraternity definitely made sure that all their members, whether it was the RCN, Royal Midwifery, or anyone in the nursing NHS world, went for Mary Seacole. That's my personal opinion, basically.
Okay. Juliet, what do you want to say about why Mary Seacole is important? Yes, I know Elizabeth's trying to get in. I've sent her the invite several times while we've been online, and there's not much I can do if she can't get in, unfortunately. I can't, she's not appearing on my screen, so unfortunately I can't see her or do anything other than keep resending her the link. So I am aware of that. Juliet, do you want to tell us why you think Mary Seacole is so important to remember?
I think, I mean, my sort of background is both in communication and education. Communications with the media before, now working as a lecturer and as a careers head in schools. And I just think that I think it's important that we put those two things together, that we communicate our past. I think it's vital that young people understand the history, the rich history of Britain. And I'm talking about all children, black, white, and indifferent children, that they all understand the history of our rich history in the UK. And I think that where we as educators, whether it's within schools, universities, in the theatres, or wherever, where we can contribute to making sure that that history is not forgotten, it's not ignored, it's not denied, then I think it's vitally important. I found the Black Lives Matter campaigns, the stuff that Jack is doing, the stuff that Patrick's doing, Charmaine and very many others here, and notice Dawn Hill as well, who's joined us here. I find the information that they are sharing about our shared history fascinating. I find it fascinating as an adult, and I think it's vitally important that our young people understand their position here in the UK and how they're very much part of the fabric of the UK, because I think an understanding of where one comes from, whether it's in the Caribbean or America or Africa, clearly that's where we originate, but also our origins here and how we came to be here, how our servicemen, our nurses and so on came to be here. I think that's vitally important that we all understand it. So I think it's not just that she's a heroine, it's just that she was here. She made a difference, she made a mark, and to ignore her and to pretend it didn't happen is a travesty, basically. That's how I feel. And I like history and I like to find out what went before. And that's why I think she's vitally important. And, you know, it's keening and it's interesting that, you know, Florence Nightingale's history was triumphed and celebrated. And at the time, Mary Seacole, as Jack has mentioned, they had the stir for Seacole to raise money for her when she came back from the Crimea and had no money. All the soldiers and all their families got together to raise money for her. So she was known, she was loved, she was exalted at the time. And then history decided, deliberately, I think, to ignore and forget and airbrush her out of our history books. And I think that is obscene.
Yes,
Could I just quickly add? I think it's important that if it wasn't for Patrick's 100 Great Black Britons, Mary Seacole wouldn't be in the national consciousness that she is today. So that one act, that one brainchild that he innovated as a visceral reaction to us being airbrushed, in many respects, kind of changed the perception of multicultural Britain, because Mary Seacole is now pre-Windrush. This is a woman in the mid-19th century, as I say, who comes from the Caribbean and comes over here and gets rejected several times, 2 or 3 times, and on her own volition goes to the Crimea and does her thing. So, you know, hats off to Patrick for conceiving that idea, and then for the public to take it up. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't us manipulating Mary at number one. There was 99 other contestants even, and she, as I said, rose to the very top. So
can I add something to that? I think one of the reasons why I did the campaign and why it's still relevant today in terms of, and the book I did with my colleague Angelina came out last year, the whole debate on Britishness. And I know it's a vexed issue because for a lot of some Black people don't see themselves as Ghanaian, Nigerian, African, etc., etc., etc. But the people that we've featured in the campaign and in the book and the conversations and the media jumped onto this in many ways, because it was the first time we had a proper conversation about what was Black business, basically, and that's another factor as well. Mary Seacole kind of epitomised element being British as well as being Black.
Yeah.
Even though a lot of people did as well, was she proud of being Black? But that's not the conversation. But I think it's an ongoing conversation, even today in the Black Lives Matter, about this contested conversation about Black British identity. And I think the campaign, as well as obviously acknowledging Mary Seacole, but it was actually the campaign which started this conversation and dialogue, which then had an impact, I think, on the national curriculum, and then it had an impact on the media and TV. And now that's why we're having all these programs being commissioned about Black British history, more books being commissioned, more conversation on this as well. So I think it's important that in ways to epitomise the Black Britishness, but it was we should have that conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, when I read the play, it gave me information that I knew about Mary Seacole, but I didn't know things like her mother was a doctor out in Jamaica working in a military hospital, and she had actually experience of treating the wounded in this military hospital before she went anywhere else. She then went to Panama, I think, and treated people in a cholera epidemic. And so by the time she came to London and offered her services to go to Crimea, she was incredibly experienced at dealing with all sorts of diseases and battle wounds, and yet they turned her down. She then used her own money to take herself off to the Crimea and set herself up there in a hotel. She went to see Florence Nightingale, offered her services again to Florence Nightingale in person, and was turned down. I mean, that is hard to fathom on a battlefield where they must have been crying out for medical help, that somebody as knowledgeable and experienced as her would be rejected. So one can only imagine that it was racism at the heart of it.
Of course.
And, so that shocks me. And then the fact that she didn't sit in this hotel and wait for the wounded to be brought to her. She actually went out onto the battlefield, risking her life to treat people. I mean, the incredible level of service and commitment to people. And yet, she was forgotten, whereas Florence Nightingale, who did far less, is elevated. What have you got to say about that, panelists? Charmaine, what do you think?
Well, what can I say? Say the question again. Sorry, I was...
Well, just, when I read the play, I realised the extent of her courage, the extent of her devotion and duty, and how much she did for people.
Well, you've got to realise she was roughly about 50 when she went to Crimea. So she was a big, as we would say in Jamaica, she was a big woman. She knew what she was about. And the stories we've got are that she used to be there holding their hands when they were dying in the middle of the battlefield. That the soldiers used to, when the guns started going off, they would cover her, and they used to call her Mother Seacole because she was there mothering to them, tending to their wounds. Florence Nightingale was there, but her hospital was miles away from the front, and Mary was there in the thick of it, doing what she's doing, and she was there's a debate about whether she was a nurse or not, and this will go on forever, but she was a doctoress, which meant that she used herbal medicines, which we do a lot in the Caribbean, and she'd dealt with cholera by using the herbs that she used, and it's a mixture of what we now call complementary medicine. It's not just about the normal medicine, it's about other things to help the whole individual. And she, that's what she did. She looked at the man and she said, they've got cholera, this is what you should take. This is, if you've got a wound, you put pomegranate poultice on or a mustard seed poultice on. And she knew things that other people didn't know. And her bravery of going out there, being in the middle of a war zone. I mean, I couldn't do it. And I couldn't do it now, more like back then. So my hat does go off to her for that.
I just wonder what she would have done during the pandemic, because I think she would have found it very difficult not to have held people's hands.
Well, we still did, and we still do.
Yeah.
But you've got gloves on.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. I mean, that was one of your questions, wasn't it, Cheryl?
Yes. I mean, what would she do today with COVID? She would be out there nursing people, wouldn't she?
Definitely.
She would.
Risking her life.
Yeah, she would. And I think that people have got to realise as a nurse, innately, you want to care for people. In the COVID, you want to care for people with the correct equipment, which at the beginning we didn't have, or it was there, but only for ITU because they were the most important and the rest of us had to just get on with it. And we were arguing about, well, have we got gloves today? Have we got aprons today? And in the end, you just got on with it and just pray nothing happened to you, because that's what we do. There were people who refused to work on COVID wards, but most of us just had to do it. And at the first wave, everyone just mucked in, and then they realised when the Black and Asian and Filipino nurses were getting sick and dying, they then realised they needed to do a risk assessment. And when they risk assessed us, a lot of us had to come away from face to face. And I in the end, I was phoning relatives of patients in ITU who couldn't come in and see their relatives because they were in ITU in a coma. The nurses were too busy. They couldn't take the phone calls. So we got a handover in the morning and then rang all the relatives at least once a day, that they got a human person speaking to them saying, this is what happened today. So I still contributed, but I couldn't go and work on ITU because I'm slightly overweight, a lot overweight, and have other risk factors. But at the beginning, we didn't even know about the risk factors. So this went on. And I think Mary would have gone on regardless of the risk factors. She would have just gone in there.
To add to that, it's interesting you talk about the Mary Seacole's heroic deeds at the Crimea and Balaclava and the whole stuff on COVID-19. And the point that you raised about her recognition, despite the fact that there was a statue of Mary Seacole unveiled in 2016, despite the fact that there are now there's been TV programs and books written about her over the last several years, despite the fact that she's in the national curriculum, NHS England decided to name the COVID hospitals after Florence Nightingale. Yeah. And when I heard about this, I was actually outraged, because you think, hold on, we're trying to change. I mean, this is a whole debate that I'm involved with lots of historians around. You're rewriting history. You're trying to be PC about history. No, we're trying to correct history, by the way, and put in the gaps in history that's always missed out, especially when it comes to the Black British experience. But when Department of Health and NHS England announced that we're going to have this whole brand new set of hospitals called the Florence Nightingale ones, I was quite outraged. And I've done lots of campaigning around using petitions on Windrush and other stuff, and I got approached by a number of nurses sharing their experience. They were really frustrated, saying, here we go again, we're being whitewashed out of history, and on top of that, we're dying like flies, and yet everyone's talking about Florence Nightingale as if there's no diversity.
Yes,
in NHS.
So that sort of raises...
And someone said to me, why don't you just do...
Sorry, Patrick, that just raises a question about the continuing undervaluing of Black nursing and our nurses generally. So perhaps we could move on to that question, really, which is, what can we do to try and change that?
I was going to talk about what happened next, actually, by the way, because what happened, I got approached by a number of nurses and said, why don't you do a petition, Patrick, because you're good at doing petitions and getting public attention. So I decided I launched a petition March last year that one of the hospitals, the NEC hospital, which is going to be named after Florence Nightingale, be named after Mary Seacole, basically. And I launched a petition on change.org. Within about 2 weeks, got 15,000 signatures. And there was lots of media coverage about that. And what was interesting is, we didn't win that particular victory immediately, because they made this big announcement. They used the Excel Centre in London and other places. But what happened was Nicola Sturgeon, to her credit, First Minister of Scotland, saying, I ain't having no English nurse named after anyone in Scotland. So she chose a Scottish nurse for their COVID hospital, who was involved in the First World War. And then there was a whole debate about, why can't we recognise regional nurses, not just Florence Nightingale? Why can't we have a nurse? So in Cardiff, they're saying, well, why can't we have a nurse in Cardiff who's Welsh? Same thing happened in Manchester. And actually, having that petition causes conversation about, actually, there's different types of nurses that need to be recognised. And to cut long story short, as a result of the petition, a lot of informal lobbying and the work of the Mary Seacole Trust and Dawn Hilton Alliance president and members of her organisations lobbied informally, as well as my public campaigning and me kind of complaint of, moaning about the Department of Health, lack of diversity. Talking about lack of diversity and that they're having Florence Nightingale hospitals. Luckily, Surrey Heath Trust decided to name the first rehab hospital after Mary Seacole, and that was done in June last year. So in many ways, it's great. But you realise in Britain there is no hospital named after any person of colour. We've got wards, we've got annexes, but we've got no hospitals. So that needs to change. I'll stop there. Sorry about that.
Okay, so I'd also like to invite some of the audience to ask questions now. And obviously, we've got this recent report from the government saying that there isn't any institutionalized racism now in Britain. You know, it's clearly absurd. But what do the panelists think, first of all? And then we'll if you could just make a kind of brief response to that, because I don't think it deserves a long response. And then we'll open the floor really to our attendees to ask some questions.
I'll just say very quickly, because mine's very brief. I think it's absolutely absurd. It's a missed opportunity. It's just, we keep using the word whitewashing. I don't know what else to, but it's just ignoring the history and the reports and the lived experiences of Black people in this country.
Yes, Charmaine, do you want to?
Well,
comment?
I work in the NHS, and I'm sorry, no one could tell me there's not institutional racism within the NHS. They are trying to get better. Okay, I started in the 80s, and it was even that when you came into nursing, a lot of Black nurses were given the 2-year course, which is an enrolled nurse course, and therefore you couldn't progress. And you know, especially in London, if you didn't have A levels, you weren't getting anywhere, and especially if you're Black, you weren't getting nowhere. So I did my training in Canterbury, thank God. But you know, and even when I'm trained, you know, even when I qualified, it was classic that most of the Black nurses used to be on nights, and those who were on days were able to progress quite easily. And I'm generalising, but that was my lived reality. And I specialised in cancer, and there wasn't that many people who were cancer nurses who were Black or in a position of or high position. And you know, there's a famous report called the Snowy White Peaks by Roger Klein, which said the Black pet nurses get to a certain level and don't get any further. If they get further, they go for a little while and then they come back. And that is still happening. The evidence in the NHS, and that's why I don't understand how this report came and said there was none, has shown that past a certain level, past sister or matron, there aren't any Black nurses in positions. So if you've got the evidence in front of you, how can you say there's no racism? That's all I've got to say.
Okay, Jack, do you want to say something?
Okay, so I'm not going to spend too long on this either, because it's all been said. We all know we're intelligent people. My cynicism would say Tony was paid off to write what he did. Obviously, we have no proof of that. But I used to write for The Voice, and Tony used to write for The Voice. And even then, he was a devil's advocate type journalist. So he has got the reaction that he wants. I would have hoped he would have showed some, let me use an emotive word, a bit of class, and taken on board what people have said, but he's dug his heels in. So history will judge him as he was on the wrong side of history.
Patrick, do you want to say something?
Yes, sure. I mean, basically, when the report came out, Vernon Trust organised a debate within the same date the report came out. I spoke along with Simon Woolley and Helena Bagan was the chief executive of Vernon Trust, and Mark Hampton Bellet, and 2,000 people went online. Literally, that event was organised in the space of 5 hours. And there've been loads of events, and then I've worked with the Vernon Trust and others to do a letter to reject the report, which we over 21,000 people signed the letter within 2.5 days, and we presented that at number 10. And what's quite clear, there's been universal condemnation of the report. And if the report's rejected, so what the government's trying to do, they're trying to salvage it. The ironic thing about the report and the debate that took place in Parliament 2 weeks ago, which is that Michael Gove, who's the Duchy of Lancaster, is going to oversee the recommendations of the report. Now, for some of us, such as Juliet, Dawn, Elizabeth of Helps is online somewhere, back online, and also Brother and OBV. In 2013, when Michael Gove was Secretary of State Education, he wanted to get rid of Mary Seacole off the curriculum, along with Equiano and other historical and the suffragettes. And we did a campaign to keep her on the curriculum. Now you've got Michael Gove overseeing this report, so that tells you can't take it seriously, in a nutshell.
Yeah. Cleo, what do you think about this report? You have to unmute yourself.
So thinking about as an actor, I know that it's still very, although things have improved recently and you're getting more Black actors, but if you go behind the scenes, there's still a dearth of people who are runners, who are directors, Black people who are costume designers, and it's a very, very limited number. And you know, it definitely hasn't spread. You know, beyond you know, the acting profession. It needs to infiltrate into all areas.
I think that's the same across many professions, isn't it? That there's still a glass ceiling, which is holding people back. I'd like to open the questions up now. We've got somebody called Jonathan who would like to ask a question. Jonathan, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I would just like to make a comment about Cleo and her dedication to her art, because I was at Edinburgh several years ago when she was performing her monologue about the person in question, and it was a basement in August in Edinburgh, and it was extremely hot. We had to have, thank you, Cleo, for laughing. We had to have fans on, didn't we? And people were given ice bags and things like that. But it was an absolutely marvelous dedication to your theatrical art, Cleo. Fantastic. And I would just like to say, go to National Theatre and see Cleo. Wonderful.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. We have Dawn Hill with us, and she's part of the Mary Seacole Trust, I believe. Dawn, would you like to say something? Would you like to unmute and join the conversation? You have to unmute, I'm afraid. If anyone else has a question, put it in the chat and I'll come to you.
Dawn, we can't hear you.
We can't hear her. I don't know why. She has unmuted. No.
No.
Sorry, Dawn. We'll come back to you. We can't hear you, I'm afraid.
Cheryl, did you see the message from Elizabeth that she can't get on? She got blocked.
I've tried her many times. Yes, yeah. I don't know why she can't get on. So Zoe Palmer has said something about Healing Justice London. Do you have a question, Zoe? You say you're currently running 2 5-month pilot programs, one focusing on the experience of health service users and one for healthcare practitioners.
Yeah, sorry, it's not me. It was just to share a link. It's just to share a link to their work. It's not actually me.
Okay. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Emma, go ahead, unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to Cleo and thank you so much to the speakers for number one, writing more about Mary Seacole and raising awareness about her, and particularly on International Nurses Day. And I was just saying in the chat, for International Women's Day, I was just looking up and wrote a blog piece for the BMJ about buildings, gosh, not going as far as hospitals, named after women once you exclude royalty. And yeah, there was a couple of buildings of University has a Mary Seacole building. I work in Salford, so I was quite proud. I'm an NHS consultant, a geriatrician, and then the only other woman, black woman or woman of any black or brown woman of colour I could find was Princess Campbell, who was one of the first sort of black ward sisters. And so, you know, it's bad for white women. It's even worse for black and brown women. And I'm just wondering, you know, is there anything that any of the panel members can say about, you know, how to sort of bring those names to the fore? What can I do? How can I influence things, you know, where I work, and kind of some of those women out if I can, or kind of raise awareness of them. And are there any other resources to find out more about these people? Gosh, there's, you know, not just 2 black female nurses who work for the NHS and in healthcare over the years. There must be many, many more. And Stephen just mentioned Annie Brewster. I'm just wanting to sort of find out more and learn more and share more, and you know, just highlight the contribution that, you know, many different people of different colours have made to the NHS, not just white people, not just white men in general. So yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a ramble, but
can I just say something on this?
Mm-hmm. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just going to add something very quickly, because I work in education now, and so I work, as I said, in schools, in secondary schools mostly, and we do a range of things, and Cleo's been fabulous. And she turns up and she does her monologue and she educates. And Elizabeth has done the same. I'm speaking on behalf of Elizabeth now. Both of them have been friends of mine for a million years. In school, we have things like career speed networking. We have option choices. Year 8s, you know, year 8. They choose their options in year 8 now. In secondary schools, not like 9 when I was a child, but 8. So to help them choose their options, we bring professionals in to enthuse them about subjects like, for instance, we're talking about health here, you know, physics, chemistry, biology, you know what I mean, STEM subjects. So all the way through, from year 7, 8, all the way through. We have career speed networking, we have work experience. I know that's sometimes difficult, but we're liaising with Healthcare Horizons, with the Homerton Hospital, because I work in Hackney, City in Islington. So all those little drip things, open days, speakers, visits, when we have international days, Black History Days, all those things, we bring in speakers to talk about and to help to educate and influence our students. So the best person to contact in a school, start with your primary school, start with the teachers who do PHSE or life skills or whatever you want to call it, or the careers person, which is what I do. And I mean, we're talking about the next generation. We're talking about the people who are really interested. They're enthused by this. They're little sponges. It's fabulous. That's what education is all about. And so let's help them to learn about what we want to teach them. Patrick's done amazing work in schools as well. Jack as well, you know. So just contact your local schools, primary, secondary, whatever it is, or sixth form colleges, and bring yourself in and talk about all the things that you want to talk about. Schools will absolutely love it, and the students will love it and take it on. That's my feeling anyway.
I have a little girl in year 3.
We have a suggestion here from June Elizabeth that we should have a Mary Seacole Day. I think that's a great suggestion. So perhaps somebody wants to run with that idea. We have someone called Stephen Bourne who would like to ask a question. Stephen, would you like to unmute?
Sorry, it was when you were talking about Cleo, and I wanted to say something, but we can still talk about Cleo, can't we? It will include Mary Seacole. I just wanted to say that again, like Juliet, I've been a friend of Cleo's for a million years. But it's when I was a schoolboy, I mean, she's going to hate me for saying this. When I was a schoolboy in the 70s, I was at a school doing a project and on black actors, and they said, go and interview one. And Cleo, I'd just seen her, we'd just been taken to the theatre, the young Vic to see Othello, and Cleo played Bianca. Never forget it, 1976. I thought, I want to interview her. And so she was very accommodating, and we've been friends ever since. But I more recently, probably about 3 years ago, saw her performance as Mary Seacole. And I've known about Mary Seacole for decades, like the others, like Jack. I was introduced to her. Let's give some applause to Ziggy Alexandra and Audrey Judy, because without them, in 1984, Mary's book would never have been reprinted. I mean, Patrick did fantastic work, but there were others before him. I mean, can I put my hand up? I even wrote about Mary in one of my books way back. And so Cleo's performance just brought the whole story of Mary alive in a very intimate setting, because it's a one-woman play. It was a small venue in the basement of a building in London somewhere. But for me, it was just so tremendously moving and emotional that she really made Mary real and come alive. And I can well understand what Juliet and others have said about Cleo bringing her alive for young people. Cleo can't possibly be expected to go to every single education establishment in the country. So let's try and find out whether it's possible for her to be videotaped or a recording made that can be, like, to go with this book, wonderful book publication. But that's all I wanted to say. Thank you. Lots of love to Cleo.
Thank you, Stephen.
Right, has anyone else got a question? Vivian, would you like to unmute?
Thank you. Yeah, like others have said, I've been aware of Mary Seacole for a long time. And in fact, when my daughter was probably in about year 4 or 5, she dressed up as Mary Seacole for something or other. But this question is a bit more parochial. I live quite near Kensal Green, and I know Mary is in the Catholic cemetery. I can't find her. Can anybody direct me?
I can. So where the chapel is, you know where the Catholic chapel is? If you come, if you face away from the Catholic chapel, and go down the road that's directly opposite, you have to go, before you get to the next road, on the right, you will see a white marble. It's about halfway down.
Thank you. You've given me a great start. I've been searching, and thank you to everybody for.
Well, we can all go and visit now.
I think we should.
Well, let me tell you, I'm going to do a little plug now. Next May, because it's our 40th year. Every May, sort of the second weekend of May, we have a service, and then we go and lay flowers on her grave. And whether with social distancing, we can have a repast afterwards. We normally have a repast. And Shane Dawn couldn't talk, but there's normally, every year there's an annual Mary Seacole Awards for nurses and leadership. And we try and get one of their speakers to come. And they have done work within the BME community to get rid of the health inequalities, even though we haven't got racism, the health inequalities in the BME group. So we usually get a speaker. So we couldn't do it this year. We didn't do virtually. We're a really small group, but the Mary Seacole Trust are our friends. And we hope to do it next year. So I'll let you know. I'll get it on if you go to the Mary Seacole Trust website, they will have the details when we've finalised it. And you can come and see her grave and sing round it. There you are. That's an invite.
Yeah, I wonder, does Avril Walks or one of those, or do include the graveyard as part of the Black History Walks?
I'm not sure, actually.
No.
I don't think so.
Jack?
Jack said no.
Do you want to come back in, Jack? Because I know you wanted to talk a bit about a project you've got going on at the moment. Do you want to tell everyone about that?
I don't mind telling everyone. It is, again, I repeat, it's a shame that we can't get Dawn back on. If it's possible for Dawn to say a few words, because she's an esteemed elder, and she's one of the persons that features in this book, along with the likes of Patrick and Charmaine and Stephen Bourne and a plethora. There's so many people in this group who are nurses who are featured in this book, which is a monster and going to be a game changer. It's called Nurse in a Nation, and it does 2,000 years of the Black contribution to British medical practice. You're going to have to work that out because you're going to think, but yeah, there were Black folk in London, which Patrick will attest to, at the times of the Romans. So we've got a wonderful history of contributing to all aspects of society here. We're going to be doing a statue. So that's the previous question. How do we commemorate the Black, quote, African presence, both in terms of literature and in terms of public realm? Well, my organisation is doing a statue to NHS nurses. It's called actually now called the Commonwealth Nurses and Midwife statue. It's going to be installed on the 5th of July at Whittington Hospital. The 5th of July, of course, being the 73rd anniversary of the NHS. It's got high support from everybody, including Her Majesty the Queen wrote an introduction to the book. So it's a monster, and I'm not going to pontificate on how wonderfully creative I am, because we're all wonderfully creative in this platform. So I'm inviting you all to either come online or participate in what will be a statue, 7 foot high, 7 foot wide, and a book to the wonderful contributions people like the wonderful Dawn Hill have made to the NHS.
Thank you, Jack. Dawn, are you able to try and speak now? Have you got your sound working?
No.
Oh. No. No, we can't hear it now.
Cheryl, there's another hand up.
Faye, do you want to ask a question?
No, I'm not going to ask a question, but I'm going to say something very quickly. I am not near London. I'm in Devon, and I'm a retired nurse and a midwife. And I watched something today which I found very inspirational, and I think you should shout about it because it's been put out by the Mary Seacole Trust. It's a video clip, Caring for the Nation, with the Chief Nursing Officer and a range of Black directors of nursing and social care and that sort of thing. And every one of the women, there was a screen like what I'm looking at now with lots of Black women. And it was fabulous. It was inspirational. And all of them were directors in the service. Because I often hear we have not got many Black nurses in those positions, but we have. And it's finding them, it's shouting about them, it's sharing it widely so people know. And I know I've retweeted it and tweeted it and sent it to everybody Black that I know. Not many where I'm living in the health service, but I'm sharing it. And I think we should shout about it. It's a celebration. Can you
share it in the chat, Faye?
Okay, will do.
In the chat so we can all have a look at it. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we've run over our time. It's been a fascinating evening, and I'm very sorry for those who couldn't join us, but I have recorded it and we can share it with them. And if there's anyone else who wants to ask one last minute question, then they've got a chance. Otherwise, we're all going to say goodnight and go and have a cheery drink. Is that it from everyone? Okay, thanks to our panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks very much to Cleo, whose wonderful book is now available online if anyone would like to buy a copy. And thanks to our attendees for being part of the event.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Well done, Cleo.
Thank you. No, thank you for making such a lovely contribution. Thank you
No
all.
problem.
Yeah.
Thanks for organising it, Cheryl.
Cleo, is this your first book that you've written, Cleo?
Yeah.
Nice one, respect.